evening, everyone. We'll talk more later as is the focus of this event, but I just want to say one, I'm really excited to play with Ching Chen, who's amazing. And yeah, you can clap. And just in terms of, obviously we're going to be talking about the arts in many different ways, but in the way that what our practice specifically has to do with this larger conversation, I think, is our practice is improvisatory. We're improvisers. And one of the things that improvisation does, one of the many, many things is obviously it can respond to the times that we're in. It's a present art form, and we know with the genocide in Palestine, with our friends and neighbors in ICE detention, there's a lot to respond to at the moment, and there always is. But at the same time, improvisation is inherently a social form, and I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about are social dynamics, class dynamics, and one of the things I love about it is that it's non-hierarchical, it's co-creative, and that's something that hopefully we're going to be doing in our conversation here later, is co-creating with you and thinking, in a liberatory way, which is another thing that improvisation can do for us. So we're going to play for a while, and then we're going to talk. So thank you so much.
Can we all give it up again for Martha and Jay? Very moving performance, thank you. So I just wanted to give quick thanks to a few folks first. Thank you to Tal, Miguel, Libertad from the Clemente, their entire team for graciously hosting us tonight. Also thank you to the A4 staff, including Leo Cheng, who's one of our co-moderators tonight. He's also our operations associate, to Danny Wu, our communications director, and to Lisa Gold, our executive director, who couldn't be here tonight but sends her love. Just a quick show of hands, who here has been to an A4 event before? Okay, cool, about a fourth of y'all. So for those of you who are new to A4, welcome. We are a 42-year-old nonprofit that serves AAPI artists and cultural workers through resource sharing, events like this, promotion, community building, direct funds, and advocacy. In addition to events like tonight, we organize a town hall every other month where artists can share about their projects and connect over a potluck meal. The next one is later this month on September 25th on the topic of traditions. It's happening at the Asia Art Archive in America in Brooklyn Heights, and it features Korean shaman Wudang Jen and textile artist Sam Sundos, so we hope to see you there. And now transitioning to tonight's event, I'm just going to also say a quick few words about the restroom. So due to renovations, the bathrooms are on the 3rd floor outside the theater. So you will be, if you need to use the restroom, you can ask Tal over here, or there's staff also in the building next door to direct you. It's on the 3rd floor. Okay, so now for tonight's panel, I'm going to do quick intros and I'm going to pass it on to Leo. We have one of our first panelists is Amartha Kindambi, spanning free jazz, punk, electronic, noise, and South Asian music. Amartha's sound challenges systems of power and the decolonization and deconstruction of borders, physical, mental, and musical. Kindambi is a vocalist, improviser, and composer, and the leader of the defiant protest jazz band Elder Ones. She's currently the Working Artist Fellow at Pioneer Works in Brooklyn and guest curator for the 2025 edition of the Guess Who Festival. Che Chen is a multi-instrumentalist, band leader, and concert organizer based in Queens. An active participant in New York City's experimental underground since the early 2000s, he has tread an idiosyncratic path from noise song duo True Primes to studying guitar in Mauritania and improvising with veterans and upstarts from the global creative music community. He is currently the program coordinator at 411. We also have Shahana Hanif. Council member Shahana represents New York City's 39th Council District, which includes parts of Kensington, Borough Park, Windsor Terrace, Park Slope, Gowanus, Carroll Gardens, Cobble Hill, Bourne Hill, and the Columbia waterfront. Woo! She is the first Bangladeshi and Muslim woman elected to the New York City Council and the first woman to represent the 39th District. Born and raised in the 39th District to Bangladeshi immigrant parents, Council member Shahana has dedicated her career to advocating for working class families and advancing a city built on care, equity, and safety.
Yeah.
And now for our co-moderators, we have Leo Chang, who is a Korean improviser, composer, performer, and scholar of experimental music. His art is an act of homemaking inspired by various musical and ideological movements that have sought to question power dynamics and imagine egalitarian possibilities. In the past 6 years, he has been focused on building electronic performance setups derived from Korean folk practices and instruments. Leo holds a PhD in electronic arts from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. He is currently A4's operations associate. Leo. And our second co-moderator is Ravish Momin, who is an Indian-born drummer, electronic music producer, and he has studied with US jazz drummer Andrew Surreal while he worked as a civil engineer in NYC in the late 1990s. His current projects include Turning Jewels into Water with Haitian electronic music pioneer Val Janty, a duo with Dragon Child of Dibu Band, and Zilzele, a digital Sufi ensemble. He's been a teaching artist across New York City for the last 16 years and is the recipient of grants from New Music USA and Mid-Atlantic Arts Foundation. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Leo.
Thank you, Justine, and thank you to A4 again and the Clemente staff for organizing. So before we begin this panel, I just wanted to spend about 5 minutes giving a little introduction that I wrote in order to provide kind of a solid foundation for this discussion. And I think it'll be really helpful in kind of orienting the scope of the discussion. So here goes. We are here to discuss access in terms of countercultural music. And a good place to begin would be to kind of clarify what we mean by countercultural music. Right? Historically speaking, I think we look to the 1970s and 80s as a time when many countercultural music scenes took off simultaneously. There was hip-hop in the Bronx, techno in Detroit, a multitude of punk scenes. New York City also had free jazz, free improvisation, no wave, new wave, noise, minimalism, fluxes, etc., where musicians like Che, Barrage, and I draw a lot of our artistic influences from. So when we reference countercultural music, I think we are talking about these types of artistic movements and scenes. And across the board, these scenes came about from an artistic community that's shared proximity, space, knowledge, skills, often political aspirations as well, and also, of course, the desire to try out new things, idiosyncratic ideas, experiment, embrace the weird and unfamiliar, and so on. In discussing the topic of access to counterculture today, and in inviting not just artists who have been organizing in New York City for many years, but also a city council member to bridge that gap of understanding between artistic organizing and political organizing, we are compelled to consider the social conditions that allow for countercultures to flourish. For example, the cost of space and housing. I was listening to a 2014 lecture by the late cultural critic Mark Fisher, when in the process of making a larger argument, he points out how social conditions, such as the tolerance to squatting in London in the 1970s, were key to the rise of a working class-driven punk movement at the time. We can easily draw parallels to New York City in the 70s and 80s. As we know, squatting was integral to various countercultural art scenes, as were block parties in the Bronx. For the Asian American arts in particular, we can look to the Basement Workshop from the 1970s and 80s as a movement that organized in Chinatown, originally in a literal basement, to cultivate politically and class-conscious countercultural arts community. This organization, A4, formed out of those efforts in the mid-80s as well. These examples illuminate how countercultures can thrive when artists assert agency and gain access within spaces where their communities live. Today, the conditions that allow for the type of countercultural arts movements in the 1970s and 80s are decimated. Squatting is not an option, and housing costs have risen astronomically, with the private real estate sector holding immense power in city politics, and police enforcement rendering most covert dwelling impossible. Arts education, along with university education in general, have become incredibly expensive, contributing to elitism in academia, along with the art schools that are housed within it, and significantly limiting who gets to even think about being an artist, never mind an experimental one. As for the racialization and exploitation of counterculture, we can talk about a number of failures. How the globalization of hip-hop and techno has not funneled actual capital to the neighborhoods and communities where they originated, or how, as musician Freco put it in 1991 in an A4 magazine at the time, quote, A very casual survey of the experimental or new wave performance scene in the US confirms that what has come to be called New American arts is neither really new nor that American, but a continuation of Eurocentrism and white chauvinism, end quote. In this way, counterculture has been systemically distanced from the very communities that they have sought to be for, even if the communities would welcome adventurous arts. Again, as Fred Ho reflected back to 1991, quote, "I have found in doing benefits with my jazz ensembles for a Chinese immigrant audience an enthusiastic response to innovative, experimental, and radical artistic forms. When we combined indigenous Kulintan music with avant-garde jazz, traditional Filipino community audiences were ecstatic," end quote. So countercultural music scenes teach us that artistic identity can arise out of a community of artists passing around ideas that catches among each other, becoming a feedback loop that eventually takes on cultural importance and breathes life into a larger cultural ecosystem. The importance of counterculture is that it in a way signals the health of arts in general, because it is led by artists and their communities. We are holding this panel today because we want countercultural movements to be self-critical, but also be in dialogue with leaders like Councilmember Shahana, so that we, the artists, might better understand how to serve community in this day and age, and vice versa, our leaders might understand the importance of artistic work at the ground level. And so to that end, I'm going to pass it over to Ravish, my co-moderator, who reached out to A4 back in August of last year. Apologies for the slow movement. But we're doing it, it's happening. And Ravish actually, along with me and Amartha, initiated this panel. So I want Ravish to talk a little bit about why he reached out and yeah, the impetus of it.
First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out. It really means a lot to see everyone here, as I'm sure you guys are artists, arts professionals, cultural workers, or just someone wanting to bear witness to this conversation around how do you deal with being an artist in a gentrifying New York. It's really a tale of two New Yorks. A real example that I had in my mind, and I just posted today on Facebook, was a few years ago I taught in the Avenues School in Manhattan, which is in Highline. Tuition there is $73,000 a year to get in for K through 12. We're not even talking college, right? And yeah, you walk in, there's an atrium, there's iPads lying around, kids just pick up a laptop and start working, and then they have a concert with a global music ensemble to begin their morning. That happens every day. And then they start their classes, right? And that's the global school. That's the new, whatever that area is. What is that area called? The Highline, is there a name for that neighborhood? Yeah. So that's the new Chelsea, right? By contrast, a few weeks later after that engagement ended, I ended up in high school, literally on 23rd Street, maybe like a block and a half down the road. Public high school, New York City Public High School. Immediately, the difference is noticeable. I'm walking in through a metal detector. There's NYPD inside the schools. They scan all the IDs of all the students coming in, marking tardiness. You walk inside, the paint is peeling, the smart boards don't work, there's no arts programs, and even though it's a high school program, none of the students had ever even had a musical instrument in their hands, like through their high school journey. And I want to begin the conversation by having Councilmember Shahana, who knows about Kensington, the community I've lived in for 25 years. And maybe just as a starting point, Councilwoman Shahana, could you speak to what are the arts needs of our communities, and what are some of the things that you see as like challenges and some of the questions that Leo has brought up? And I mean, it's such a big conversation, but like, where do we begin?
That's a great question. Where do we begin? Thank you all for joining us tonight. It is so exciting to be in conversation with artists and artist leaders. This doesn't happen often. I often see leaders come to testify at our hearings and share with us that the city is inadequate in terms of funding our arts institutions, cultural organizations, and much more. So this is really important and imperative, I think, for policy making and also budget. The council has full power of negotiating the city's budget. We do that with the mayor. It's been a fight. This year was the first time that I voted yes on a budget. And one of the reasons was because $41 million was baseline for cultural institutions and arts programming in our public schools. So that fight, Raj, that you just described, like that has been glaring, and it is so sad to know that nearly 300 public schools don't have a full-time arts teacher. Or when principals need to make a decision around their budget, their school budgets. And this occurred after we were coming back to school through COVID. The federal funding was drying up, and what decisions were being made were at the cost of not including the arts. And so we essentially removed arts and music teachers, and there are fights within the council for having at least one music teacher in every school. I mean, we should not have to legislate the Department of Education to do that. So many concerns, and I want to just share briefly that I also grew up in the arts community. I was 17 when I was diagnosed with lupus, and the outlet for me to understand who I was, what am I going to become, how do I get care in this very complex city where my parents don't speak English. I was exposed to creative writing and open mics, and I co-founded the Muslim Writers Collective. And that was an incredible outlet for me to meet with other artists, because I, at the time, 17 years ago, did not know Muslim artists who were my age, or South Asian artists, again, my age, who were exploring topics that were not just, that were more contentious or controversial. So on the concerns, I mean, the biggest concern is the fact that working class New Yorkers are leaving. We are a city that is becoming more and more unaffordable, and that means that the arts community is dissolving, as in they're leaving and or being pressured to choose between their craft or having to save up for rent. And so myself, I know folks are following the Zoran campaign. We are fighting for a city that is livable, and that includes having universal childcare, it includes having affordable housing, it includes artist studios that are affordable, and housing subsidized for artists. All things that the city council and the mayor has power to implement. So I have been on that journey as a council member. The arts is incredibly important for how I designate funds, and also the fight in the council as to be outspoken about the needs, and to not forget that we have Asian artists. Asian artists are often forgotten in the conversations, and being one of very few Asians in the city council, it is really incumbent that we keep bringing up, hey, don't forget these Asian organizations that are led by community or residents or young people that live here and want to pursue the arts.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. And just to piggyback on that, and I kind of open it up to either Amirta or Che. As organizers, and you guys are both amazing in your own work with organizing concerts and community-centered activism, how could you take something about what Shahana is saying, or have you seen that in your own practice? But getting people from the communities to the show, or has that been a struggle? Like, one of my things is always like, when I walk into a club, I'm like, wow, it's a pretty hipster white audience, where's everybody else, you know? And I know there are people there because they live in the neighborhoods. I just want to see them at the shows, and that's like drives me insane for 20 some years in New York, and which is one of the big reasons I want to have this conversation. So kind of either Mirta or Jay, you guys can.
Yeah, both of you.
Both of you. Just like, I mean, it's a big question, right? So I want this to be like a free-flowing conversation, because like she brought up a great point. We want funding, but just because we have the funding there doesn't mean they're going to come, right? Or does it? Like, I need to hear from you guys. Yeah. Right.
And just because you have the funding doesn't mean that it's used in the ways that it can be most impactful. And I think that's where you really need to be artists on, like I worked for a nonprofit for a long time, an experimental arts nonprofit issue project room, and the kind of top-down funding coming through institutions always, because the access to that funding is still going to be mitigated by curators or programmers that often, and this is just how it has been for so long, are white men of privileged backgrounds. There's a huge class disparity, and so I do think, starting from education, that's huge for me. I teach at Brooklyn College. I went to Brooklyn College for my master's, and I've been teaching there since 2011. And I teach in the building that I teach in. So when I went to Brooklyn College and I finished in 2011, they were building this new performing arts center, and they moved us to this other building called Roosevelt across campus, and they called it a swing space. And now it's, how many years later, and I teach in that same building. It should be condemned. I think there's some statistic about I teach an electroacoustic music ensemble, and there's leaks all over the room for an electronic music ensemble, and every day, and it just goes to what Ravish was saying earlier. But my students, which is really interesting, and one thing I love about CUNY, are all Black and brown and Brooklyn kids. Overwhelmingly, they're from New York, they're either from Brooklyn or from other boroughs. And I think there's this assumption that sometimes is made, not just in education, but also by us as artists, about what kinds of people will think, XYZ aesthetics are interesting. And I think what Fred Ho said, that he in the performing very experimental music and seeing the audience reaction, I think we don't even give people the opportunity to actually see this kind of experimental or adventurous music. And my own journey to getting there, I didn't have music lessons growing up. I was forced to do Bharatanatyam dance. The teacher lived close by. It was very cheap. Give her $10 and she'll take all these girls for the whole day, and we hate her and we're miserable. But so all my music education came through public school. I signed up for choir, for band, for drama. I hate musical theater, but I did it just because it was a way to perform and be on stage. And I, had to fight tooth and nail to even convince my parents that I wanted to study music. So that's just kind of a pretty typical story. And with my students, I see, I had that kind of latent assumption that was probably taught to me in my music education by all my overwhelmingly white professors, that, this is weird. So, a kid commuting from the Bronx to study music tech, they make hip hop and they won't like XYZ. Even somewhere deep in me where I've done so much deconstruction, I had this I don't know if they're going to be vibe with this whole improvisation thing. And year after year, I'm just seeing how excited the students are, how liberating it is to give students agency and be in this class, which I'm actually missing right now because our class day got moved, which is really funny, but you can make whatever you want. From now till the end of the semester, you're going to create original works of art. A lot of them are producers who have never played music live, and I see them make the most crazy, experimental, interesting works, and I had these students who were steel pan players, and they're in the West Indian community, and they were producers, and the music that they produced was trap, primarily, that was kind of the vibe. And then when, I asked them what they wanted to do in the ensemble, they're I don't know, we play steel pan, but that doesn't really seem relevant. And I was is there one that we can bring in to class? And so they brought it in, and then by the end of the semester, they had contact mics on them, they're running them through Ableton, and, so I think that the assumptions are part of the problem. I think like the fact that a lot of the institutions and the curators are so disconnected from these communities, like you said about Trans Picos, about when they first started, like.
Yeah, just an example. Years ago at Trans Picos, which is now like the hipster part of Queens, Ridgewood, I met one of the promoters, and we're walking around showing me this new venue, which is going to be all the rage. And we're walking around, and I'm like, so all these cool bands are going to come through here, and again, I have to be blunt, it's a white promoter. And I asked him, like, this is a Puerto Rican Dominican neighborhood. What about plans of including them into this community space? He's like, well, they're not into what we're into.
There's an assumption, and there's just a feeling of, in these spaces, like, because I had this thing at Pioneer Works this year, I've been inviting, they've said, if you want free tickets, like, I've just been inviting my classes to everything. And, these are students who've lived in New York City for many, many years, and oftentimes I can see when they walk into the space, it's the first time they've ever been inside of a space like that, And so I think even just like how, there's funding to institutions, but often the kinds of outreach programs are very narrow. They're not very imaginative. That's one thing. But also the people managing the money, where the money is centralized is always, they don't have a connection with these communities. And I think that is a big problem. And so even as an artist, if you want certain people to come to your show, you have very little control over making that happen. There has to be so much kind of repeat engagement with the community for that to really be something that you can see.
That's an awesome point. And Shay, as an organizer of 411, which is, if you guys don't know, it's an amazing space for experimental music of all kinds. And how would you respond to that in terms of audiences you've seen and how that looks?
Well, I guess I would say, the simplest answer, it's a complex question, but I think the simplest thing at the root of it to me is that you really can't engage these audiences if you don't have real relationships to them, and I think that's, being at other nonprofits and like Emertha, I've done work for other nonprofit programmers, and a lot of times it's like, oh, we want these minority groups to have access to what we're doing, but it's almost kind of like an extractive kind of thing, like, oh, we want them to be here because that makes us look good, and that is good for our numbers, which is good for our funding, et cetera, but it's like there's no actual relationships between the people funding and organizing and these communities, right? And I think, kind of like Shahana was saying, when I started organizing things like the same way, like I wanted to play shows and no one was going to give a 15-year-old a show, so you booked a show at a coffee house or wherever, any space that would let you, and I think also similarly, I didn't see other Asian American kids in the mix, really. And I grew up in DC. I was a teenager in the 90s. There's amazing, hardcore DIY scene there around Discord and Fugazi and stuff. But it was mostly white. It was mostly white guys. And so I sort of took from that, but also felt like, oh, I didn't really feel at home in that community. So organizing was always kind of a way to kind of find my people, and my family, they're Taiwanese immigrants. I was the first person in my family born in the country. So yeah, I think who you put on stage is also, it's not a guarantee that people that look like that, those people are going to be in the audience, but it's a start, and I think that's really important. And I think another thing that I think has changed a lot is that in this scene that we're in, there really are a lot of non-white participants in the scene now, which when I arrived in New York, in 2001, that was not the case at all. And so I just kind of want to point that out, that is a really different thing.
Yeah, on that note, I'm curious to hear from all three of you about maybe a group or kind of show or experience where you were like, yeah, this one, great, more of this. You know what I mean? Like, you know, there's just little moments you get carried away. And it's like, yeah, we need more of this.
I can kick that off. So in Kensington, where I was born and raised, I was, as a neighbor, part of a neighborhood association and had identified 2 spaces to become public plazas. And this is around 2013, 2014. And we created, with a lot of advocacy and force, the Avenue C Plaza and the Kensington Plaza. And both spaces have transformed the way in which our community feels in terms of safety, how community is interacting with others, and how we show up when we feel that we need to show neighbors that we are here when we are experiencing an Islamophobic attack, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, whatever. And also a gathering for eating together. One of our arts organizations hosts iftar dinner annually, and it's one of our biggest events in the district all year. But when I went from being just a neighbor to working in my predecessor's office, one of the things I wanted as he was leaving, this is former council member Brad Lander, he ran for mayor. As he was leaving, I was concerned that the arts organizations that were performing or utilizing Avenue C Plaza throughout the summer months, they include Casa Cultural, the Singing Winds, Bangladesh Institute of Performing Arts, Arts and Democracy, Art Build Studio. So many of these organizations may not be prioritized by the next council member. Of course, at that time, I didn't know I would become the council member, but just like thinking about the future ahead, that, hey, this is an office that has prioritized making sure that arts organizations are out and there's exposure to the arts. And in the early days of the curation, yeah, we didn't see a lot of people, and that was okay. Now, fast forward to 10 years later, the programming, not only are they abundant, but our volunteers, folks who might be doing a fellowship in the organization, are from our community. Young people who volunteered throughout the years are now in college, and it's wonderful to know that the arts has always been a part of their life, not just in school, but in their home community. And it has also allowed families to enjoy the arts together as opposed to it being separate or like a hidden activity that a young person has to do. And, you know, shows our family members and elders that arts is okay to pursue, and I can be passionate about this and actually study this, or, you know, be with others in the midst to strengthen my craft. Tomorrow is a free concert by Sunny Singh. Mayfair Power Trio, they're performing at Avenue C Plaza, and I'll be there. But that whole broad coalition of arts groups, which is now called the Kensington Cultural Council, is a project that we've put a lot of time and effort into, meeting quarterly with the arts groups and artists, talking to the young people so that we're all connected. They just got this really large grant that will, you know, allow us to do more, and that excites me, that arts will always be central, no matter what is happening in the world, and joy will also be centered.
Thank you. I think for me, my most like moving and inspiring and places that I felt like really grounded and at home in terms of, you know, cultural experiences have very rarely been in institutions. And I think the reason I moved to New York was because I would watch these videos online of like the DIY scene. you know, in places like, it was in Lower Manhattan and Williamsburg at the time. I like immediately got involved with venues like Death by Audio and Silent Barn, all RIP, like all of them, for many of the reasons that Leo stated earlier. But there's still so much grassroots organizing, and I think, especially in the last awful 2 years in many ways, but I think the cultural solidarity events for Palestine have been some of the most, like, where I've just felt centered. I felt like we share values. I look around the room, it's so many diverse people. Like, it's not just about the whatever music is happening. It's a fundraiser. There was a fundraiser that I participated in that was hosted at Light and Sound Design, which kind of has the feel of like the old loft DIY space, which was by this, it's just a couple. They're the producer Dynaman and his partner Zara Deco. They do this Tarka event. They're Pakistani American, and and she had made, Sidra, who's Zara Deco, had made this massive biryani. Like, it was like insane. I was like, how long? She was like, it took like days to make this biryani, and it was, you know, like we were in this kind of DIY space, eating this wonderful biryani, talking about, it was a fundraiser for Palestine, talking about everything that was going on, all these different sets, like Roshni Samlal did like this really cool experimental set with another musician whose name I'm forgetting, and there was the DJ set at the end was like super experimental, and I think that was the thing that was so cool to me about it is, I think when I got here, the kinds of brown or Asian American things that were happening were just like, yeah, the really, I know it was important, but Brooklyn Raga Acid was not a thing I felt any resonance with, to be totally perfectly frank. Not because like of something that's there. I mean, well, okay, maybe, but like there's a lot of dynamics. There's a lot of like class dynamics. There's a caste dynamic. I'm actually from a Brahmin family. I've had to like deal with that shit in my own home, but there's a lot there where it's like, oh, traditional music, right? It's like always like highlighting traditional music. Oh, it's a community event, we're highlighting traditional music. That's great, but that's such a narrow part of who we are. And so, like for me, I remember in 2021, Ravish, when we were organizing, I had like made a post on Instagram. It was like, because the COVID was so horrific in India, and like the prime minister's a fascist, and they were suppressing the numbers, and also communities that were marginalized, like Dalit communities and Adivasi communities, and all like trans communities were not like, you know, any money that was going to COVID relief wasn't getting to those communities. So I made a post and was like, we need to have an event. We did it. It's such an institution. It's weird. We wanted to do it in Queens, and we were trying to figure out where. And MoMA PS1 ended up being amenable to it. I think we almost thought like no institution like that is going to do it. It was kind of a nightmare to organize, to be honest. And but what ended up being cool was when we were making the list, we made an organization called SAID, which was South Asian Artists in Diaspora. We're all very proud of that acronym. And we had invited Prachi Patankar, who's an anti-caste activist, to have a conversation with Zohran Mamdani. We had like lots of different speakers throughout the day. And when we were putting together the program, I really was like, I want to show a different side of the South Asian diaspora. One, like across the whole subcontinent, across, you know, religious divisions or caste or all these things, and like show, yeah, the experimental kind of community. And like the list actually kept getting longer and longer, and I was shocked by that. Like even me being part of it, I was like, once I actually started to see it, and then when we had the event, it was incredible to look around and see like, wow, these folks are here. But we were artists who put that together. It was grassroots. The institution didn't come to us and say, hey, let's do this every year. Wouldn't that have been fucking cool? Of course they're not gonna do that. They barely like let us do it there at the end of the day, you know? And so it was people, it was grassroots, and so like it is really important to fund arts organizations, but I really feel like how do we strengthen the health of artists themselves or kids who want to become artists with access to housing, with like basic like needs met, because that is where like we're doing the heavy lifting, I think, of making these types of things happen, and they don't sustain. Like our collective basically couldn't do it anymore because none of us had time. Once the pandemic ended, we were off that sweet pandemic unemployment insurance, and we're all organizing a million things and trying to make a living and working several jobs. It's like we couldn't do that labor anymore. You know?
I remember when we were organizing that, and she was obviously spearheading everything. I just asked, could we do some Queens Library, Queens Museum? And I remember that came up. And
we
really
try to meet with
we
all these
tried.
people,
We were
yeah.
really trying hard to connect with all the Asian diasporic communities. There's a big Bangladeshi community, Rochester, for example, right? So I was really thinking hard about like, where can this be where we would have a meaningful engagement with an Asian American or diasporic community? But then also, like what Shane said, like just because you have people that look like us doesn't mean that we're gonna get that audience, right? So this conversation is like, we're not gonna solve anything today, but like, it's such an important conversation. It's just like sitting here listening to all these amazing people talk, and I'm just getting all these ideas of like, okay, what can we do, right? And we're gonna open it up to you guys soon. But like, so important to have the funding, so important to have people thinking about these things, and so important to have the space. And it's like, there's all these things kind of coming together. And again, I want to say class is a big deal here. Because like, as an Indian, I know that a lot of Indians who go into the arts come from money. I mean, if you think of it like, if you're an immigrant, your parents do not want you going to the arts. They want you to get a good job, like you get, right, the class, you get 4 choices, right, doctor, lawyer, engineers, programmer, and that's like a joke, that's all Asian knows, right, like your parents give you those 4 choices. That was the same for me, so I became a civil structural engineer to please my parents, but I was like unhappy and miserable. I'm like, there's gotta be more to life than, just doing this, but like, that is important for a first generation working class immigrant family, right? Like they want you to do that. And again, I don't want to name names because you might know them. And it's like, but as I keep uncovering who's making it, it turns out a lot of them come from families of means, have lots of funding, have lots of resources that allow them to go to music schools, which by the way cost between $50,000 and $80,000 a year. That's not cheap, right? If you can do that for a music degree, that isn't going to be one of those 4 jobs. That's a heavy thing, right? So I think like, how do we create like access to education where we get people from Kensington to come to shows that Amir Noche is putting on, or bring artists from floor 101 to Kensington, or whatever. Like that to me is exciting, and I'm like, I don't know how to do that, and I think it's great. This mix of people that we hear.
I will say it is happening. I think we should, say that what we're hoping to expand is happening. And I think for me, having seen the transition from being a young person in Kensington and not having any arts programming, and I was in the choir. So like I grew up singing, and then in college I wasn't a pre-med major. Or an arts major. I was a women's and gender studies major, but it's pretty close to the arts. That I had to hide my identity from my parents, and the pursuit of exposing the arts being central to the Bangladeshi community, heritage, history became very important for me. And the exposure by way of plaza and space making became central because I think it's the tough ask is for an organization to plant itself and have a storefront. It is tough. Getting there is tough. But how do we make sure that organization still has footprints in the community? We've done collaborative projects with various museums where anytime folks from the Kensington Bangladeshi community have been highlighted, like in
in a series of archive called the Muslims in Brooklyn, I have made sure with artist leaders that this is not just for others to witness, but for the community, the folks who gave those interviews to come and also participate. And it's important. I mean, even when artists approach me, I'm like, one, who are you and why? And what are you going to do with these people's stories? Because it's extractive. It could be very extractive. And so I think like in communities where you have sustained art, and it's not just through funding. I mean, just giving funding doesn't mean that Arts and Democracy is doing whatever. That it's minimal funding, minimal pay, and they're creating abundance with pennies. However, ensuring that they stay alive and that people are engaging with them, seeing the family, the community, really feeling invested and being like, why wasn't there a program today? That's the piece that I'm interested in, the continuity and the visibility and demonstration that arts is essential. It's not a thing that we are bringing in. It's not a thing that we're proposing and trying to activate, but it is central. It is a part of the city. I mean, you can't talk about New York City without talking about the arts.
For sure. Yeah, I love that. And I love this dual reality that you kind of mentioned of, things are just not enough, things are really getting harder. RIP to many spaces and and efforts, but the fact that, yeah, it is happening, and like for me, meeting people like Amartha and Che in the kind of early, I got to know Ramesh later, but like in the early kind of time when I was just kind of looking for people and community was, it made me continue. It was like, yeah, they're doing it. I can do it. It's that simple. Like, I got tossed around in academia because I needed a visa. That's one of the only reasons that, you can stay in the country. There's not really a pathway to kind of legal immigration via the arts unless you have reached a certain level of excellence or impressive, extraordinary status, right? A lot of you, I'm sure, know. And so outside of kind of that kind of sanitized institution level of higher ed and these kind of strong theoretical kind of approaches, what I really wanted after that was community, and that's with these people is where I found them. And so, yeah, in that vein, Che, what is some moments of community?
Well, I'll say a big one that happened recently was that a friend of some of us, Tashi Dorji, amazing guitar player who lives in Asheville, North Carolina. He organized the festival down there, and it was through Catalytic Sound, which is like a improvisers collective. I think they're kind of more on the sort of like trying to set up some kind of fair wage sort of streaming thing that's run by artists. But anyway, it was sort of under those auspices, but unlike all the other editions in other cities, Tashi just invited a bunch of Asians to Asheville. And I think for most of us, it was the first time we'd ever been at a festival where it was like almost all other Asian artists. And it was really small. He raised the money. Catalytic didn't do anything for him. He raised all the money like from local businesses and stuff. And and most of us stayed at his house. Like, I think I slept in like his kid's bunk bed. And we were just like all over the floor. It was just like this slumber party. And you know, there was a lot of like eating and talking about food and making great music. And you know, it was really like a very familial vibe. And yeah, and I think that really stuck with a lot of us, and to the point where, you know, then after that, Audrey Chen, who's an amazing vocalist, who's from, well, kind of repped Baltimore, but has been in Berlin for a long time. She and Henrik, her partner, were there. He was an honorary Asian, he's actually Norwegian. But when they went back the next year, they were kind of so moved by that experience that they set up a little festival in Berlin, you know, and then that also led to a festival in London, you know, and these were all just artist-organized things. So the point I'm just trying to make is that, like, you know, you use what you have and organize, like, inside your community, and those experiences are so powerful. Like, it's really just one-to-one watching it happen, you know? And then, you know, after we did London, then Audrey came here, and I go organize a show. There was a cassette, you know, and Leo played it, and a bunch of other people in town, and yeah, I guess I just want to emphasize that relationship. You do like one, and then another one, and then another one. You know, that's kind of what the sustained effort is this sort of one at a time thing. You know, there's no like magical institution that's going to come and take care of us. You know, it's not in their interests. You know, and it's like, it's really about people and relationships and just extending that. So yeah, I guess that's what I would say. Just like, don't wait. It's like, it's on us to organize these things for ourselves and continue these things, you know. And if you can pair with an organization or nonprofit, that's great. And you see eye to eye, that's great, you know. I'm lucky I work at 411, and I feel like it's the first nonprofit I've been at that sort of, where this is the conversation around the table. And, you know, it's also the first nonprofit I've been involved with that, you know, where the leadership and the collective that runs it are all non-white. You know, they're all South Asian, and Black, you know. And, well, there is a white person that works there. But we like her.
There's always one. Anyways, yeah, I think, and also just a wisdom to gain is that, you know, it's happening, and artists and local leaders alike are great at making a huge meal out of, you know, the little that kind of comes down the stream, and I think it goes back to kind of what Amirtha kicked off the night with, saying improvisation. It's everywhere. It's powerful, and you have to do it. You know, it's a way to bring meaning and kind of bring power into a space where you might find, you know, very little of. But yeah, I think now's a good moment to kind of open it up. I'm curious what, you know, Raj, Amirtha, and Jay might have to ask Councilmember Shahana, or inversely, what Councilmember Shahana might want to ask the panelists.
I think that's a great point. I would love to know what she has to ask of us, because we're
Yeah.
asking her a lot of questions.
Right. It's true.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't want to start there. Not to put you on the spot, it's okay, but anything that comes to
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'd like to start off with one. So, you know, the council member or the city government isn't like a magical wand that like fixes
or like can capture all of the issues that we just talked about, we're one part of the tool in getting to that sweet space. And important for me has been really connecting with smaller arts organizations and arts organizations that have immigrant artists who don't speak English, and two, like having them be able to do what they want and not limit them. And then in terms of policy, like making sure that every school has music teachers and arts programs, etc. My question is, what are you witnessing that you think needs to be a budgetary priority or a legislative priority in this city when it comes to the arts? And this could be for any tier of age, it could be for schools, it could be for the parks, it could be for whoever, but what are you seeing as priorities that we should be uplifting?
Can I go first real quick? Education. As a teaching artist in New York, again, I have kids in all these Bangladeshi communities in Parkchester or Kensington. They've never been outside. I was like, it would be great to take them to a show at ballet or something that's out of their scope, just to expose people to something different. And I would love to know, I know I saw something in your brochure about something called a participatory budget. I would love to get some kind of education budget in there to get like community leaders like Shay and like Amirta be involved and like bring artists and even themselves, like that show they did, which I thought was an amazing duo, to bring that to Kensington. You know what I mean? Like, I think just to, like what they saying earlier, right? Like, we don't want it to be extractive, where like Shay said, we have a budget, we film numbers. Oh, we had like Korean Americans, Filipino Americans, Chinese Americans, yay, budget. But then, how are they actually also involved in the art making on their side, right? I think that's a really hard question, you know. I think the education part, getting people like Chan and Mirta to come, bring their
absolutely.
You know what I mean? I think like that kind of across.
Totally.
I think it's a simple start, right?
I would love to figure out how that can happen, because one, we are constantly looking for arts organizations to be able to do their craft in the neighborhood. So arts and like these organizations I just identified, they're able to ensure that arts remains a part of the community. And on Kensington Plaza, every month during the summer months, we bring a musician to play on Kensington Plaza, which has been a place where trash accumulates. There have been times when homeless folks have created shelters, and instead of calling the police or finding ways to shove the homeless people out of the space, the way that my office intervened with community leaders was through arts organizations, and like bringing in the Singing Winds, Jill Rainier, who's also the parent coordinator, who used to be at PS230, finding bands and performers to come play, and just to hear it. You don't even have to sit. You're passing by, going to the supermarket, and you're hearing this, and it's a part of the experience. So how do we, how can I find you guys to call you guys and be like, hey, come forward, because we're constant. We want that. There's what council members want.
I think I am starting to hear where there's a missing piece here, which is if it's always mitigated through organizations, you're only going to get certain types of things. So if you get like a cultural organization that's an Asian cultural organization, that might represent a certain part of that community, but what's interesting, maybe what's specific to this panel, is this idea of counterculture. And, we are more underground. And the thing is, like, we have arts organizations that curate this type of work, like The Kitchen or Roulette or Issue Pride. I think we actually have antagonistic relationships with a lot of the places that are supposed to be our cultural organizations that are supposed to represent us. whether it's their investments, and their boards are filled with real estate people, their boards are filled with lawyers, right? If you were to give one of these organizations like a day to curate in your plaza, I don't think they would think of us.
We're not ending. Those organizations are not
Right. Well, right. Well,
and I'm not funding it.
Exactly. But then also, weirdly, if you maybe tapped a South Asian organization to do it, I still think they won't call me. You know, which is like it's not about creating opportunities for me specifically, but I think like we're a really weird sector. There's a lot of us actually. There's a lot of us. I do think we're on the vanguard of like all the movements that we talked about, like the counterculture is where so much of the next thing, the new thing, the innovative thing happens. And so because so much of what we have talked about has been grassroots, I think it actually would be like more like trying to maybe meet with like artists, not individuals, but if there's a way to have an open thing of like, okay, we want to invite artists, not organizations, but artists to come in and have pitch, or not pitch because that makes it sound like Shark Tank or something, but like which I've never seen, but I think that's what it is. You know, like to be able to share, like I live in Sunset Park, which is like, I will live there forever, I love it so much, and I feel like Marcella and Alexa are very accessible, but I've never really thought about like going to them and be like, hey, we did try, okay, and in the pandemic, right out of the pandemic, we were trying to form a collective, me and several other sort of experimental musicians. It was all POC, and at the time it was council member Carlos Menchaca, and I had a meeting with him because we were forming this collective, and we were like, is there somewhere some kind of, even if it's a swing space, somewhere we could have sort of regular space to have like a rotating group of people to do music lessons or, you know, improvisation sessions with kids in the community, where we could also present concerts, where we could also have like activism stuff, where we could also maybe have practice space, rehearsal space. And he kind of, you know, we had started the conversation, but then it was like actually right before that mayor's race, and there was a whole drama around all that. Anyway, it got dropped. But that was the only time I ever even thought to try, because he was accessible, and I was like, all right, I guess we could ask about this. It felt so bureaucratic. I think we kind of all sort of was like, this is just not maybe, you know, the avenue, but maybe it's a way to build more connection with artists, individual art. And then I would say housing is obviously the other major piece. That's a bigger piece, but like so many of the elders in our community, like the elders from the AACM, the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, who came originally from Chicago and moved to New York, and they were a collective of musicians who modeled their collective on the Black Panther Party organization structure, basically. But it was a time where they could do that. They could buy housing. And it's not just them. They're like William Parker is another person I think of in New York, where like is such a community person. But it was a time where you could access like housing. You could put shows on in spaces, and I think there was a lot of artist housing. Like a lot of the AACM members lived in Hell's Kitchen and the what's that building called? I'm like forgetting it. Not Westbeth, that was one, but it's one of the other ones, I can't remember. Anyway, I've been there a bunch of times, but it was like, a lot of them lived in that artist housing, you know? And then of course, CUNY, Fund CUNY. It's like, CUNY is a resource. It has so many problems, especially right now, if it's capitulating to, you know, beheading and letting heads roll for the congressional committees. It's horrible, but the faculty at CUNY and the students at CUNY are like incredible. The students are incredible, and I think like CUNY needs to be revived in New York, really, really. But yeah, I think organizations are great, but I think in our sphere, we're a little, there aren't that many like 411, you know.
To your point about, having gone to Minchaka's office, I mean, this is not the priority of every elected or leader. Like, let's be real. So, I mean, in my instance, this is a priority for me, and really wanting to expand my exposure is important. And so I really appreciate having met you all and like now being connected to see where we can collaborate, where we can partner, because our young people would love to see more South Asian performances that are not by folks who are doing sort of like the traditional that you pointed out, like Deepa, for instance, focuses on a lot of traditional types of music and dancing, and we're getting a lot of that. But really bringing in that, hey, the expectation isn't that you become a dancer like this or play music like this, but know that we're not a monolith of performers and artists. So here's others.
And for young people, I roll a lot of those events. We used to be bored. I actually love Carnatic music. I love, now I really appreciate Bharatanatyam, but when you're young, I think you're like, this isn't what I'm interested in. This is so I think there's gotta be something that feels like the young people that I interface with at CUNY, my students are like, the breadth of music and things that their exposure is just so massive. So like having just a bigger scope of, and because so much stuff ends up becoming identity oriented, of like, either you have to tell the story of your culture somehow, or sometimes I'm doing that, sometimes I'm not. Like my band is a protest band. It's not a band about Indian American identity. And I've actually felt that that's problematic for a lot of presenters and institutions. They want me to be more, just do Indian cultural stuff. Don't talk about capitalism and imperialism and colonialism. That's, but even if it wasn't protest music, if I was just making abstract art, like for some reason that doesn't serve the purposes as well for, let's say, a city organization or a culture organization, like, no, perform your culture, tell your story, that's problematic too, I think.
Well, one action step we could take from this, from what I'm hearing, is you can bring your students to Kensington Plaza to perform. We want to see the breadth of what's out there in terms of creativity and how young people are finding their craft and how they're exploring opportunities. So I'd be honored as a Brooklyn College alum to ensure that the folks you're working with, you're teaching, have a space to share their work and see where else we can take it.
Love that. I think it might be a nice time to go into questions from the audience. Anybody?
I don't have a question, more like a comment. Well, honestly, thank you so much, everybody. This conversation lives rent-free in my head for years, and I struggle with this because I'm a first-generation Palestinian American, and I feel like as an experimental, interdisciplinary musician, mover, all the different things, I feel like, and Ravish, I know Ravish because he curated a show for me at the Rubin Museum. We were a part of a beautiful thing when I first moved to New York, and I felt like, okay, these are my people. But I feel like we get lost in these spaces that are white dominant. And when George Floyd got murdered, it was a time for me where I just distanced myself from these spaces. And when the genocide started, again, just distancing myself from spaces that are not aligned with my values, that just partake in tokenism, extraction. And if I wanted to perform at these places, I have to talk about my suffering. But how about my joy? How about the fact that I'm alive, breathing air right now, and my people are being slaughtered? So I really want to question these places like roulette and things like this, where why don't we just deem these places irrelevant? You know what I mean? Because there needs to be in this. Yeah, they can meet. I went to performances at Roulette and call it world music. I go see West African music. Guess who the audience is? All white people. Bald, white men in the front row. In the front row. All these white motherfuckers. Most people like me, like people that come from working class, no music conservatory background or anything, it's not accessible price-wise to pay $35 to see these. This is music from your ancestors, and this is being performed to people who take it and they do not give anything in return. This is like what we see with gentrification, with tourism, in all of these places. You know, take, don't give. And I was a part of something very cool recently. I'm not going to go too much into it, but I will say Amartha was there. I did perform at the Museum of Modern Art with this beautiful ensemble of all black and brown women, one trans person, and we decolonized that space. The artist we performed inside her exhibition, she's from Nigeria, we decolonized that space. And I really have a hard time dealing with, do I want to be in these spaces? Can I be in these spaces? What if I don't want to be censored, so if I can take up space in a way without being censored, and I can pay my rent, and I can be with the people who fill me, who touch my soul in deep ways, like, I'm not there for them, but I did give them. Trust me, I gave them everything I had. I screamed, I cried. People heard me on the 6th floor when they were looking at Jack Whitney paintings, okay? Jack Whitney, a jazz a painter who was adjacent to the jazz movement in the 60s, Black Panther movement, all that stuff. It was a joy to be a part of that, but it took me a lot to be like, okay, can I say yes to this without being a sellout? Can I say yes to this? And I don't know, there's so many stories, I can go on, but we really need to deem these places irrelevant that do not serve us. Because we make these spaces relevant. We are juicy and spicy. We bring life to these spaces. And they don't get to decide whether we get to be in the spotlight or not. I'm going to take it. I'm going to take it because my ancestors want me to be here. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to say thank you for this beautiful conversation that I felt like really needed to happen. And I just hope that something comes from this that could inspire the generations, to come, especially kids, because I never saw Southwest Asian, North African people on stages playing experimental music, ever, okay? I met a Palestinian person who runs a label that's about to release my record. I met him at a Jimmy Branch show at Public Records in 2021. I was like, you exist? I honestly never saw another Palestinian person in the experimental music scene. So, and I also want to touch, just really quick, and thank you so much for handing me the mic that's non-existent, but I want to say there's an importance of the archive, and someone touched on it for a second, and I'm going to bring up that I'm going to release this record with this Palestinian label. They're based out of Ramallah and in New York City. The artists that run that label are successful artists in the institutions, but they run this label as an archive where they platform all Palestinian voices. A lot of voices that are in Palestine right now on the ground in the West Bank that don't have access to any kind of resources. So I just want, in their work also, they work out of an archive. And they talk about the importance of the archive of keeping it alive, the story, how it's really supposed to be said, because we already know that the mega corporations and all the newspapers, and they're all mouthpieces for the white, rich-ass people. We have no business listening to anything those places have to say, because they're lies. They're rewriting our story. And so, it's a little bit, we gotta take control of our narrative, but really, we can't have these people telling our stories. So there's an importance of the archive to keep the story alive.
Yeah,
and so they use the label as an archive to
I think
publish.
this is something we didn't really touch on, but you did in your opening. It's not like we're new. Like, we may not have encountered another Asian American, South Asian, or Venezuelan artist like when we were young, but there were communities, like you mentioned, the basics of Chinatown. I grew up in the Bay Area, rarely mentioned in the history of jazz so it's also important, I think, to like go into that archive and show that there has been a history of people doing this for a long time. So I think
There's a question there.
Thanks. Related to also a lot of what you were saying.
Speak up a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't think
Oh,
my
yeah.
photos.
Okay. I had a related question because, these institutions, I think Spotify is becoming one of them, with the pandemic, everything became so digitally, centered, and it became, how do we package, the beautiful thing that is music that happens live in front of us, in the same room. How do we package that into, this series of ones and zeros that can, somehow bring money, to people, and not to the artist community. And, trying to fight for, these little crumbs that, these institutions, Spotify being one of them, I would say, maybe, places like Writ can be, in terms of how they pay their artists. It's everyone's scrambling, it feels like. And, in this kind of, race to acquire these limited performance opportunities or, all these things, I feel like I see a huge trend of, self-abstraction, or, really leaning into I see a lot of artists doing I am incorporating traditional Chinese melodies into my music, or just doing indie rock music but singing in Chinese. And so this brings me to a really huge question that I've been thinking about a lot, which is what does it mean to make Asian American music? For me, I haven't really ever grown up seeing anyone who's Chinese doing what I now dream of doing. The only person I can think of is Ryuji Sakamoto, who is Japanese. And in terms of Chinese artists, now I've grown up, I've dug through the archive, and I've become involved in the communities. Now I can name up to 5 people, on one hand, and 2 of them are in the room who inspire me. And it's just really crazy. So how can I wonder if it's worth defining what Asian American music is, because also I think about how this kind of music isn't really possible in China, or it is, but it's no one will listen to it, no one, and it's actively suppressed. By the government, by all these sorts of things, and it's such a traditional heavy place. So I think about how this kind of music is only possible, really, in America, or becomes way more possible. I mean, these days now it happens everywhere, thanks to globalization. But I think about this question a lot, what does it mean to make Asian American music? When does it become just tokenism? When is it something new, making real new American music?
Just real quick, we're not a monolith. As you can see, we all come from different practices. My current practice involves heavy beat making, and that was a big challenge. For 20-some years, I've been in New York since 2000, 2001, but I can't get a gig in New York. It's I play with global music that draws from jazz. I play with members of the ACM, so I have that in me. Asian to the future, I do that. When I go to roulette, they're well, too many beats. I go to a free venue, they'll be oh, it's too many beats. Or I go to a electronic venue nowadays, and they'll be oh, yeah, you're not a DJ. So there's no place, but I've been touring and successful, knock on wood. I've been making a living. I've been able to tour 30 countries and play, but I haven't been able to play in my own home city, ever. Unless Marita gave me an opportunity, and she's been amazing. She's let me open for her at Brooklyn Records and do a benefit with her. But once in a while it happens. So for me, it doesn't happen. So I think, my blunt answer is we need to make it happen in New York, right? Because do you really need to go back to China to appeal to people who get it? But why not? Why not be able to play here? There's enough people here that should be able to access your music and have access to a platform where you can do that, right? And it's so frustrating it doesn't happen in New York at all. And when I say this, people don't believe me. They're oh, come on, New York is this cosmopolitan city. I'm New York is very conservative. It's very segregated.
I would also say, just directly to Scott's question, in terms of what is Asian American music and how do you define it? Defining it as something that comes after, that's for historians, etc. And you know, I think as Asian, you know, as Asian American artists or musicians, you know, there is no tradition, you know, and it's not like Black Americans who have defined every step of American music along the way. You know, we don't have that on the one hand for inspiration, but we also don't have to contend with that, you know. So the sort of lack of a tradition, and you know, again, like Amartha was saying, it's like people have been doing this. You can find the Fred Ho's and the Jason Cale Wangs and etc. going back. So I'd say one, look for those people because they do exist. But I would also say, do whatever the fuck you want, you know? Like, you don't have to answer to anybody. It's like, you can define this for yourself, and ultimately that's what all the greatest musicians that you look up to did. You know, they weren't trying to define a genre, they were just, you know, somebody said, you know, the tradition is being yourself, right? So.
But I also think there is something about, like, maybe it's not defining like what an Asian American artist is. Like, I think when I started, I was contending with my identity a lot. Like, I was grappling with that. So, like, I, you know, didn't study Carnatic music, even though if somebody else would refer to my bio, they would just insert it in there, like, just like all the time. I was like, I don't know where someone got this from, because I was a Bharatanatyam dancer, not a Carnatic musician. And so like that happens kind of whether you ask for it or not. But in the beginning I was grappling with that. I was like, I went to harmonium because it was in my closet, and I grew up singing folk music, like bhajan, traditional music, like Alice Coltrane, kind of became a devotee of the guru my family was following, and so people know what that is now. But I think once I had sort of figured that out, or not figured it out, but like contended with like that part of me, because it was a part, right? Like, and it's a big one, and it's really foundational. But also was like the punk rock DIY shows in the Bay Area, so was like 90s hip hop, so were all these other things. Once I was able to kind of contend with the identity piece, I was able to move forward. But I noticed that, yeah, like the larger world, like capitalism they want these kind of easily, you become a commodity, kind of, as an Asian American artist, as South Asian, or Manaswana. I think maybe it's more like defining, or not defining, but like showing this is a community of artists. Like, instead of each of us individually being like, what is it to be an Asian American artist? Like, maybe just seeking each other out more and trying, like the festival that you're talking about. I'm like, man, we should do the South Asians. We're like, sometimes we just don't do shit like that. That's so cool. I mean, not that this is new too, I guess, so we could just do it, but yeah, it's like just doing it. The community is the thing maybe to make more visible than for each of us to be like representing Asian American art or something.
Right, and in that vein, I think where I found solace was in community and in history. Like, history is a great way of understanding like why we're here in this current kind of mind-boggling glitch of a reality. Because, you know, I didn't understand that it was not possible for me to even really correspond with a Chinese person until 1992. That's 1 year before I was born. Right? It wasn't possible, really. You'd have to go back before Japanese colonialism for it to really have been freely possible, right? And so, like, if you think about the impact of that, and then like understanding, you know, really trying to understand what the impact of US imperialism is, what the impact of kind of the Cold War was, then I think you are better able to make peace with like the distance that we have maybe with our kind of home cultures And of course, I do at the same time want to show empathy to that impulse to be like, yeah, I want to do this in my home, like what I consider my home, right? That's in all of us. That desire and that kind of sadness, that's in all of us. That's a point. That's a point of solidarity that we can all kind of have. And I think that's really important to carry that connects us all. That kind of, that innate sadness. Sorry, so many questions. I'm gonna go to the back row, sorry.
Hi, my name is Jamila, so thank you so much for this conversation about counterculturalism. I didn't know if that was a topic before, but now I do. I have some thoughts, and I'll try to streamline it as much as possible. So I would say I'm a multimedia artist, just working in social justice, but now trying to find my way into DJing as a form of storytelling. As someone who's like born and raised in the city, actually in Lower East Side, there's been a constant erasure of our Bangladeshi communities, especially in this neighborhood. So I think when I've tried to like dabble into like finding community, I don't exactly identify as traditional Bangladeshi like music or the arts, I really don't, or traditional South Asian or Asian music. It's always at a spectrum or an intersectionality. I guess what I'm trying to say is like, it's hard to build community, and then we spoke about classes. It's definitely classist. When you go out underground or something like that, it's very tailored to a certain audience. While we can be there and enjoy it, it's really tailored to a certain audience. So really trying to break through into that as being someone of community and understanding that's what we need. I guess I'm curious to know, where can I find that? So for example, I'm trying to get into vinyl, but that's also about access, right? That gets pricey. That's something, if you're looking into global music, it does get, we're talking about access, but it hasn't been that easy to access with limited resources. So I guess it, like everything, I'm just like processing everything, but I also want to be someone who gives back, and we're able to find ways to be action-oriented after this, and I definitely want to be a part of that, you know? So thank you for this, and I guess I'm just sharing my thought, because for the last 2 years, I've been trying to dabble into the DJ role, and I have, but when I look at it, it's such a niche space. You talk about it as a brown girl or as an Asian American, it's a little classist. It's this divide where I don't actually want to be.
It's completely classist.
Yes. So I generally don't want to be defined by my music because it can change. I've been evolving, so I don't want to stick to a medium where I'm being defined by that. So it's just like an interesting space, and I would love to like build that community through this space as well. So
I feel like you know.
Yeah, so I know a Sri Lankan woman, she's queer, she's a DJ, she was supposed to be one of our panelists, Tanu, and she has built a great party where she caters to queer and BIPOC communities and has built these amazing dance parties, which are safe spaces for people to come together, and she's working class. So let's connect after this, and whoever, by the way, I think, I don't want to speak for Leo, but maybe there's a mailing list that they can sign, or for Councilwoman Shahana, that way we can all be in touch and then communicate back with you. But there are people who are doing what you're talking about, and there's space being carved out. It's harder, but it is happening. You know?
But I think it goes back to Amrit. Your point is like, what I forgot. Amrita, like sometimes there are those spaces, but it's still so like a specific group or a specific audience. And I'm just saying that as someone who's kind of like dabbles into these spaces. It's like, I don't know, I think I'm on that nexus of like haves and have-nots, and it's an interesting space.
Question here?
Yeah, I think we might have to do our last question. I'm very sorry, I'm going to try to be as random as possible. I'm going very back row, because usually
like nobody raises their hands. So
yeah, exactly.
I think this is a question more for a council member. I actually recently spoke to a musician who got this opportunity. I think there's a housing unit on 42nd Street specifically for artists, if I'm not mistaken. And he's 45 or 50. And he's told me that, oh, when I was your age, I applied to this housing unit as an artist. So maybe if you apply now, you can get this, this subsidized housing for artists when you are my age. So in any case, I wanted to ask, perhaps you mentioned making housing more affordable for artists. I was wondering, do you have any specific plans for creating artist-specific housing, or for example, there's another program which I saw in Chicago which experimented with giving essentially universal basic income towards artists. It was, I think, a pilot project where I think they got like $1,000 a month. But I'm sure I can say this to all of us that would completely change our lives and how we make art. So.
Yeah, definitely. I'm so glad you asked that. In Gowanus, there was a huge neighborhood-wide rezoning to bring 8,500 new apartment units. Of the 8,500, around 3,500 are going to be affordable in terms of will be on the lottery system. Among those are 100 artist studio spaces that are below the area median income. So a huge priority in the Gowanus neighborhood, because it is so central to New York City's art community, was to ensure that no artist who already had a studio would get displaced. And that was a priority as we were having conversations with what the community needed. And Arts Gowanus was one of the main organizers to ensure that artists stay, and also that artists were active in the housing conversation. So that's really important, just that being involved in the housing conversation, because council members right now are the ones that decide whether housing gets built or not. We are living in an affordable housing crisis. Unfortunately, the housing conversation becomes either you're pro-housing or not in my backyard. And we have to negotiate in a real estate-driven market, which I think, Zohran's gonna win, and my hope is that we shift the way we address housing, because we need social housing, there are community land trusts, but none of that is the priority of the administration that approves all of the projects. So right now we're stuck in this space where when I negotiate a project, which I did in Windsor Terrace of 250 units, and had to demand 40% be affordable for working class communities and at very low area median income bandwidths. It's celebrated, but also 100 is not a lot. But community often pushes back and says we don't need the market rate housing if we're not going to have all affordable housing. Unfortunately, all affordable housing is not a reality in this real estate driven market. And so how do we as leaders then decide, are we going to build housing or not? I am a pro-housing council member and working with what I've got, and your question really just really gets at the core of what we need to thrive. We need to have permanent affordable housing. You need to feel that this is your home, your community, that you're not going to be a transplant, or that you won't have to keep hopping from neighborhood to neighborhood to find space, or that you're going to have to pick up a second or third job, which takes away from your craft. So housing is a huge priority, and I approve projects that come my way. The Gowanus rezoning is a great example of mass housing and the inclusion of artist housing. And certainly to your point about specific housing complexes being for artists is something that has definitely come up, and I'm excited to explore more of that as projects come our way.
Thank you so much to all the panelists, and definitely continue. So we're well over time, but Clemente has generously offered to kind of keep the space open for you guys to all kind of chit-chat with each other, build that community, ask questions, further questions that you didn't get to ask. And so, yeah, we'll be around till about, it's only 15 minutes, but still better than nothing.
Thank you guys all for coming out.
Yeah,
Really
thank
means a
you.
lot. Thanks for having us.